Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you authors, corporate innovation managers, entrepreneurs, and above all else, thought leaders on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you successfully navigate your innovation journey. Every Monday, I'll bring you a world-class thought leader such as Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, or Whitney Johnson, just to name a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you some quick digestible insights myself to help end your week on a high before you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is proudly brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school, and consultancy that works with large organizations to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies, and tools required to explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. If your organization needs support coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit Collective Campus online at www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 72. Today I'll be speaking with Gary Bolles. He's the co-founder of eParachute, a San Francisco Bay Area-based startup focused on helping job hunters and career changers, inspired by the best-selling career book of all time, What Color Is Your Parachute? Bolles is also the co-producer of Closing the Gap, a new event focused on strategies for increasing economic mobility in the face of tech-driven disruption, located in Palm Beach, Florida. As a partner in Charette, Bolles also writes and lectures on disruptive trends and serves as consulting producer for a variety of conferences and strategic events. He was the co-producer of Closing the Gap, a conference focused on strategies for an inclusive economy. He was the co-producer of Degree.org, a 2010 conference focused on the future of higher education, and is a co-founder of SoCap, socialcapitalmarkets.net, the premier gathering for impact entrepreneurs and investors. He has served as consulting producer for numerous strategic events for clients such as Google, Yahoo, Singularity University, TED, the United Nations, the Guggenheim Museum, L'Oreal, and the London Business School. Formerly, Bolles was the editorial director of technology publications such as Yahoo, Internet Life, Interactive Week, and Network Computing. We talk about a number of different topics on this podcast, but really focus in on people who are looking to disrupt themselves in some way, shape, or form, which has been the topic of a few of our recent episodes. It's never been more important that people start thinking about change and being more adaptable. And Gary covers off on a number of different approaches that people can take to first identify what they're good at, what they should perhaps be looking to explore, but two, how to go about that. It's not enough simply to know what you want to do. It's about how can you go about that? How can you increase your chance of success? And what else do you need to be thinking about? How can you continue to keep yourself educated, continue to be relevant, and continue to be employable in this age of rapid disruption? And as somebody who has over 40 years experience in this space, Gary brings an absolute wealth of knowledge. So it gives me much pleasure to introduce to you the one, the only, Gary Bolles. Welcome to the show, Gary.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program, and you're joining us all the way from sunny San Francisco, California.
Not sunny today, but that would typically be the weather.
Yeah, it's funny. You guys are over in the northern hemisphere. We're in the south, and yet somehow I believe we both have overcast, non-sunny days. So I'm not sure how that works.
It must be sister cities.
Must be. We've both got the cable cars, so that must say something. So you're obviously an awfully busy man, Gary. What's been keeping you busy as of late?
So a lot of my focus recently has been on what I think of as the future of work and learning. I think it's difficult to separate the two out, but we obviously are at an inflection point where there's a tremendous amount of change going on in the way we learn, in the way that we work, and there's a tremendous overlap between those. And so the framing that I use is if you think of when especially Western economies went through this really substantial shift from primarily agricultural to primarily industrial economies and societies. In the U.S., that took, depending upon who you talk to, anywhere from 60 to 85 years, and happened in a couple of waves. But we remade a tremendous number of our institutions. For instance, in the U.S., we came up with high school. You needed to be trained to be able to read a manual in a factory and that sort of thing. And so we're going through as fundamental a shift, if not an even more fundamental shift, as we transition to a digital economy, but it's happening in a blindingly short period of time. And so the ways that we think about how we're going to continually adapt to those changes is critical right now. It's really, really important that we have the dialogue around how, and I tend to work at this at various levels, but as individuals, as organizations, and as countries, how we think about this at, from the macro level, and approach what talk about is how we thrive in disruptive times.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned we moved from agriculture to the industrial age and now the information age, and agriculture was prevalent for thousands of years, and the industrial age, as you said, only lasted perhaps under a century, and now we're already entering the next age. And like you said, it's just getting shorter and shorter, and people have less time to adapt. And I've interviewed the likes of Whitney Johnson, who wrote Disrupt Yourself, soon interviewing Jenny Blake, the author of Pivot, and they both speak at length about the topic of personal disruption, which, as you've rightly referred to, in this age of exponential technology growth, it's becoming more and more important and more critical. So what kind of questions do people need to be asking themselves in order to avoid being automated out of a job, Gary?
Well, so the way I typically approach these things is, so first off, there's the influences, the changes that are affecting the worlds of work and also of learning. There's a number of different factors, and they all sort of interplay together. Mm-hmm. So disruption comes not just because of automation, but because automation is paired with globalization. So if all that technology could do is to take tasks that you used to perform and make it so that a software or a robot could perform those tasks, that's sort of one result. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, even the process of what I call unbundling work, that is taking the pieces of what used to be jobs and breaking them apart and allowing those to be distributed, means that on a global scale, that's how businesses can do it efficiently, and why there is actually an economic incentive to do it. So first off, it's important to be thinking about, well, what are the tasks, what are the things that I do, what do I love to do, what are the skills that I use, mm-hmm. what's the type of work that I like to do. One lens is, well, how much could that work be done elsewhere? That is, if somebody, if I work in a shop and I make change for somebody, that's kind of hard to go ship that job someplace else because it's in person. I have to be there. But there are other tasks that are much more easy to sort of break up and make available, and that's why what we typically have called outsourcing. But there's a tremendous number of what are often called labor platforms or work platforms, mm-hmm. that allow work to be split up, everything from Mechanical Turk to even Elance are platforms that allow work to be done someplace else. And so that means that it doesn't mean a robot has to do my work. Somebody else could be doing that work, but charging a lower rate. Or providing some other value. And so it's important to be thinking about not just what I do that could be automated, but what I do that could be done by somebody someplace else, and how I can continually, increase my ability to deliver value and meet the needs of whoever's paying for my services, no matter how that work is being performed elsewhere.
Yeah, and I guess that echoes the teachings of What Color Is Your Parachute, where we talk about, first you need to understand what makes you unique, your unique skill set. Second, understand situations they are best applied in. And third, what are the underlying mechanics when it comes to finding that opportunity. Right. And I guess the fourth thing that I wanted to ask about is around that mission and purpose that comes with that. Like, yes, you might be great at doing a certain thing. You might find that, hey, you can apply this in industrial design. Here's how you go about finding the opportunity. But will you actually enjoy that work? So do you have any advice for people when it comes to finding that life-changing, mission-driven role? Because I think with Gen Y especially, and the emerging Generation Z, that fulfillment and self-actualization is becoming something that's more and more sought after.
Right. Absolutely. And it's something we encourage. So if you think about it, if you could just picture a graph in your head where the vertical axis is what you're good at, and the horizontal axis is how much you love something. So down in the bottom left corner, where you're not very good at it and you don't love it very much, well, hopefully that's work you don't have to do too often. We all have to do jobs that aren't a ton of fun. One of my first jobs out of high school was making 2 piles of paper out of one. And I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't enjoy it all that much. But it paid the rent.
We've all been there.
So we've all been there. So and we all should be there to some extent because we all need to learn how to work hard. So the range though of that bottom axis from stuff you don't love at all the way through to the far right, which would be a mission or a purpose. There's a bunch of steps in between. So the first step is mild interest or curiosity. So something that you didn't know was all that interesting, and you read an article or a friend points you to some book or something like that, and you start to move along that path. What we strongly encourage people to do is to figure out the ways to be able to identify the things that they love doing. So you have skills, you have knowledges, you have personality traits. There are types of people that you like working with. There are types of environments that you like working in. The more you can do that kind of self-inventory, so it's the first part you were talking about, sort of the 3 pieces of figuring this out. The first part we call the what. So what is true about you? What's unique about you? And what we find is because we're all trial and error machines, the more we do the things that we are almost designed to do and do well, we tend to like them more and more. And so as you move along that path of the things that you really enjoy, people who learn more and more about themselves and who find more situations where there's something that very strongly resonates, those are the people that we think of as moving more and more towards understanding what their mission, or some people like to call that a purpose. Now, there are people who can work their entire careers just along the left axis. Yep. They can become very, very good at something that they absolutely don't love at all. And I've counseled people in their 40s and 50s, starting back when I was 19 years old, who felt that they were in dead-end jobs. They were really good at it, but they didn't love it at all. Well, that's a choice. We all need to put bread on the table. But increasingly, there are more and more opportunities, more ways that we can either identify or create work that could be the kinds of activities we really love doing, or meeting a purpose that we think is really, really important. And that's what we encourage people to continually, why it's important to do that self-inventory. It's really important to understand enough about you to know where there's a good potential match for the ways that you can actually have an impact in this world.
Yeah, and you touched on a fantastic point there, Gary, around people who get really good at work they really hate. And I know quite a few people in this space. Obviously, I'm not going to name any names, but I mean, what kind of things do people, looking for that purpose or mission, but stuck in a job where they believe, stuck in a job where they're comfortably miserable, perhaps they're well paid, they've got a peer group there that they've known for quite a while, and I suppose they're part of a culturescape that doesn't support disrupting yourself, and they feel like there's no alternative. Well, I'm on this path. I've been on this path for 10 years. I've developed my personal brand in this space. There's no alternative. What else am I going to do? But they absolutely hate what they do, and they live for the weekend.
Right. All right. So 2 things. One is I'll give you an exercise. We can hand to our listeners to do. So the first one is identifying what it could be that you would really love to do, or that that would give you a stronger sense of mission or purpose. And the second part of it is how would you get there? Yes. So on the what it could be, what I would encourage our listeners to do is that let's say that we wave a magic wand and suddenly you have $1 million, or maybe it's $100 million, or maybe like one of our current presidential contestants, $1 billion. And at least that's the rumor. If you wave magic wand, you have all the money that you need. Now, what are you going to do with your time? What are the things that you would want to be able to have an impact on? Whom would you help? What would you be doing? I mean, so most people say, "Oh, I want to travel," and so on. Okay, get that over with. Now, what do? And that's where you start to, if you remove money and the restrictions, daily restrictions of our lives, and you say, no, you can do whatever you want, that starts to get the juices flowing. Now you realize, oh, well, here's 3 or 4 different things I think that would be a ton of fun for me to do. So that helps to solve, or helps at least give you some ideas around the what could I do. Then there's the how would you get there. And so the first thing that we find is that as human beings, because we make decisions along the line that are expedient. We have to have this work because we need the money. We've got to pay our rent or housing payment. We've got to feed our family and so on. That we made these expedient decisions, and then if we want to make a big change in our lives, it turns out the first step is permission. Mm-hmm. And we had 46 years of experience with this. The first step is, so first you have to allow yourself to even dream about those things. You have to believe, you have to have hope, which is one of the important parts of it. You have to have hope that you could do something different, or you could potentially find a situation that pays you just as much or more than what you make now, but would allow you to do the thing that you love. You don't make all these assumptions about how you'd get there or what that would look like when you got there. Right. Just do the same process everybody else does when they go through any type of career change, which is back all the way up, throw out all your preconceptions, and just figure out, well, what could that be? And then you start to do the research to figure out how you might get there. But permission, allowing yourself to do it, and then asking for permission from your spouse, your kids, whomever, to let you dream like that. If you tell your spouse, hey, if I could find a job that pays me just as much as what I have now, and it would be something I loved, would that work for you? Then that can start you along that path. But we find if people don't have that permission from themselves or from the people that they love, then they don't move.
Yeah, and I really like that first question around if you could wave a magic wand and money wasn't an issue, what would you do? I think that's such a powerful question. And like you said, get rid of all the travel, get rid of all the just hang out by the beach somewhere for 12 months. I mean, that gets old pretty quickly. And as human beings, I think we want to contribute and we want to give back in some way, shape, or form and create. And eventually, just lazing about. It gets pretty tiring pretty quickly. But if someone has, say, done the same thing for 10 years and, there's so many options out there when it comes to change. I mean, they may get into marketing, design, development. They may start looking at these emerging technologies. They may get into industries such as tourism, fitness, healthcare. So many opportunities. I mean, do you have any advice for people who are looking to make these changes but don't quite know where to start in terms of, say, taking small bets across different areas?
So it's an excellent question. So I tend to talk about what I think of as a portfolio of work. Mm-hmm. In the past, we had and I put this in the context of unbundling work. In the past, in that post-industrial era we were talking about, the one job, one person, and it followed a model that we often call the 3 boxes. So my father, in addition to what called as eParachute, he wrote a book called The 3 Boxes of Life back in 1986. And he said, nobody tells us this, but the truth is we have been living in a 3 boxes model ever since the industrial era. And that's the first box is education, the second box is work, and the third box is leisure. And the typical joke is, there's a fourth box and it's made of pine. But let's focus on the things while you're living. Yeah. So we get this big chunk of education with very little work, very little leisure, and then we suddenly shift into this work box. But in the past, that was a fairly steady state period. You would study something in college, and then you work as a lawyer, you work as a doctor, you work as an accountant, and that actually defined a lot of your identity. I am a doctor, I am an accountant, so on. And then you would work until you're kind of done, and then we had this thing that basically was made up called retirement. I actually call it the period formerly known as retirement. Yes. Because at least in the U.S., only 20% of all the people between the ages of 45 and 65 have saved more than $200,000 for retirement. So they're not going to retire anytime soon. Mm-hmm. So you have this big box of education, big box of work, big box of leisure. And in the work box, it would be pretty steady state. Well, that's not happening anymore. You're finding is that people have a different relationship to work increasingly, and that is that they might have even a day job, but then they're driving at night for Uber. They are doing a startup on the side. They are designing products that they're selling on Etsy, or there's a range of different things that they're doing, and together I call that a portfolio. And so what people can do, there's a variety of things. Many people go through the process in different ways. And our answer is always, if the way you go through these changes in your life continues to work for you, awesome. Don't change a thing. If you get stopped, or if you feel that you can't get started, then here's some strategies to consider. So the first one is what you have pointed out, and we call that self-inventory. The what's unique about you, and so on. It turns out that people don't just need permission, but they need information. They need to know, what am I good at, and what do I love, and so on. And we're not taught that. Our schools never, in that first, the education box, we were never taught the tools to be able to do that kind of self-inventory. So the more you understand yourself and the things that excite you and energize you, then you can go to what we call the where part. Is, okay, so now I've got all this information, and we say that there's 7 different categories of that information, from your transferable skills and your knowledges to the working conditions and the kinds of people you like to work around. But if you have more information about those 7 things, and the kinds of elements in those categories that excite you, then you go to figure out, now where in the world, what types of work would that entail? And there's usually, because we all, if you've lived to any age, you've got a range of skills that you've been able to use just by being alive. You can mix and match those. I call them a career DNA. You can mix and match them in a lot of different ways. So it's not just one job that you might be meant for or able to do. There could be many different kinds of work. And so in the where part, it's exploring. It's doing research. It's talking to people. It's what we call informational interviewing. It's just gathering more data about not just what's available, but what you might be able to create. And here in Silicon Valley, it's taken as a complete truism that you can start anything you wanted. You can start a company. You can be part of somebody else's company. That basically there are no requirements around that risk taking. So the where is kind of wide open in environments like this. But then finally, once you've made some decisions, you've decided that that's a field. You mentioned a range of different fields, but that's a field that I think I might work in. Here's the kind of role I might like to have. Then it's the how part. It's the mechanics of figuring out, now, as that exists, can I find it? Again, using informational interviewing and contacts for what's often called the hidden job market, or do I create it? Am I going to find that there's an opportunity for me to go to a company and tell them, this is a problem that I can solve for you, and you need to hire me, or you do a startup, or something in between, where you're doing it on a consulting or contracting basis.
Yeah. And you touched on some points there around, in the industrial age, or even for much of the 20th century, it was okay to go to university, stop learning, and then just be an accountant for the next 40 years, and all would be good. But today, thanks to that rapid technological disruption, we know, for example, in Australia, a report was released recently by, I believe it was the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, which found that about 50% of today's jobs will be replaced, say, in the next 10 to 15 years, whether they're automated, whether they're sent offshore. And that's why that constant learning, whether it is going out, meeting different people, networking, taking some online courses with Coursera or Udacity or one of the MOOCs, or some short courses in a physical classroom, it's becoming more important than ever. And even if someone does identify that role, like you said, and goes out and does it and enjoys it, chances are that they may need to start thinking about what's next and just adopt a mindset of adaptability more than anything else.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly the right mentality. I sort of glanced off of the, robots replacing your job sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, the Australian study. There's a variety of studies that have been done in a range of countries talking about the potential impact of, again, it's the combination of automation and globalization, not just technology, but the work kind of gets spread around. And so the truth is we've had these periods where either because of rapid automation or because of changes in the way our economies work, there have been jobs that have been left behind all the time. There aren't a lot of buggy whip manufacturers in the U.S. anymore. I don't know if there are in Australia, but so jobs are left behind and new jobs are created. There's two schools of thought. Yeah. One school of thought is jobs will simply not be created by people or by corporations fast enough to be able to replace the ones that go away. And some of that replacement will happen because of automation and globalization. And therefore, we're going to get a smaller and smaller pool of available work, and therefore there are going to be more and more people out of jobs. That's one, that's sort of the dystopian, the tech dystopian model. And then the tech utopian model is, well, no. We've always created new jobs in the past. There's tons of jobs. For instance, in the past 10 years, half of all the people that are media buyers that buy ads online and buy ads from different publications have gone away. There's always been jobs like that, and then there's new ones that come up. And so, my question is always, well, what would you do differently if you knew that either of those was to be true?
Yep.
And what's useful for people is, you've actually mentioned one of the most important things is to have an adaptive mindset. Is whether your job specifically were to go away, the truth is you only need to find a job for one person. So you don't need to look necessarily at these big macro numbers about the number of, engineers, for instance, is now sort of the hot job. Software engineers is now the hot job in the U.S. But you don't have to look at those numbers. Look instead at what you think that you love to do and you're good at. And then just know that the types of work that is more likely to get automated is work that's repetitive and doesn't require a lot of insight or analysis, or synthesis, really human types of capabilities. And so if you're doing something that's repetitive and it doesn't require a lot of thought, chances are really good software or robots are going to be used to replace that activity, within our lifetimes.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the two schools of thought, and there are those schools that say, well, at the start of the 20th century, the majority of the Western world were farmers, and now I think the stat was 80% in the United States. Now it's something like 2%. But then you've got the opposing view, which says, well, if you look at, say, as recently as, say, the early 2000s, we had Blockbuster Video, who had 60,000 employees and a market cap of something like 4 or 5 billion, I believe, at the time. And now you have Netflix, which has 4,000 employees and a market cap about 10 times higher, because they're able to leverage these technologies and therefore have a much smaller workforce. And you touched on the jobs that don't require much thinking. And I guess traditionally, people that I suppose have been, say, lesser educated could always fall back on your service jobs, whether hospitality and so on. But now we're facing this prospect that even those jobs may face a high amount of automation. So I guess, do you have any views on what that might look like for people who say don't go the path of education? They simply looking for a job. They're not looking for a career. They're not looking for a mission. But we have quite a few people out there that simply just want a job and they just want to live life. Do you have any views on what that might play out like?
So I think there's a number of elements to it, and you've actually touched on several that are really critical. The first is that sure, we have had these changes in technology and disruptions before. I'm sure there's a ton of people who worked on a farm and then didn't want to go work in a factory or didn't feel that they could be trained for that, and they were left behind. So it is a huge concern that an older worker is not going to, and who wasn't used to change and who didn't need to change. They just had the same, relatively similar job for a long period of time, that they're going to have to change the way that they think about it. They're going to have to become more adaptive. And that's a huge challenge. As you get older, you don't tend to become more of a risk taker. You tend to become less of a risk taker. And so that's one of the things, one of the ways to be able to help people with that is to shift towards this model of lifelong learning. So let's say that you went to college 30 years ago, and I always say colleges have a massive opportunity to be the enablers of a lot of this change. What business do you know treats you for 4 years as a customer and for the rest of your life as a cash register? So you go there and you're a student, and then from that point on, you're an alumnus, and you're supposed to keep on just contributing money and get very little value back except for psychic benefits. And so instead, what if your college said, hey, we noticed that you're updating your LinkedIn profile. Does that mean you're going to be changing careers or changing jobs? Hey, why don't you come back here for a weekend, for a week, for 6 weeks, for 6 months? We will help you to retool yourself for that next phase of your life. And so that's a tremendous opportunity. And you're probably going to want to do that with somebody that you really trust. Another element, though, to what you're talking about is in the past, sure, you would go to school for 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, get that degree, and it would be useful and valuable for a really long period of time. We're going to likely shift more and more towards a model where a lot of education will be shorter frame learning. And so the example that I use, there's a startup here called Udacity, started by a great guy, Sebastian Thrun, used to run Google X. And so Sebastian went to AT&T, the big comms company, and said, give me a couple of jobs that you just can't hire enough people for. And so the 3 or 4 jobs, AT&T then said to Udacity, here's your opportunity to give us an educational, a learning experience where you could teach people in a relatively short period of time to do this job. We will hire every single one of your successful graduates. And so Udacity calls those nano degrees. We're very, very likely to see that kind of collaboration between the demand side, the employers, and the supply side, schools and online schools, with shorter term, very focused learning experiences, so that people can not have to go back to school for a 4-year degree, can do a 3-month, 6-month certificate program and be totally qualified to do a specific job.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what you've just said, given that we run countless short courses here at Collective Campus. But it is, like us, there's many boot camps out there that focus on, say, it could be data science or web development or digital marketing or coding on the blockchain or virtual reality development, all these emerging skill sets. And oftentimes these courses may just have like a fundamental introduction that goes for a number of weeks. And then, hey, if you want to develop further, you can do this. But I guess the challenge that universities have is that they are part of a larger system and they have that high cost base, and that oftentimes a lot of the traditional providers, I suppose, want to be putting out certified courses, and oftentimes that can slow them down because they can't create and get those courses certified quick enough before something else comes along.
So no, it's an excellent point. I wrote a piece on what I call unbundling higher education on medium.com. So if you just look up, at Bolles, Gbolles, I've got a series of papers on unbundling. But on unbundling higher education, what I think is really, really important to understand is that as education is the field, the business of education becomes unbundled. That is, as you can take online courses, you can do the kind of boot camps that you're talking about. These much more focused learning experiences. What ends up happening is the higher education is going to become unbundled, just like every other industry that the internet has impacted, from media and all the way through to healthcare has been the most intractable, but that'll eventually start to happen too. But for education, what ends up happening is the field itself becomes bifurcated. So if you think of any field as a healthy pyramid of businesses, from large multinational dominant brands at the top to small niched and focused at the bottom, what the internet does, what unbundling does, the combination of technology and globalization, is it evaporates the middle. So what it means is that it's increasingly you're more able to start something at the bottom or to be able to be small, niched, and focused. So that means everything from community colleges to incubators to boot camps. And you have a very hard time dislodging the businesses at the top. So in higher education, that's what we would call Ivy Leagues. I'm sure there's an equivalent in Australia that are the brand name schools. Those are always going to be fine because increasing returns means that brands at the top are strengthened, brands in the middle are weakened. And so what it means is that in the U.S., for instance, if you're a small liberal arts, small to mid-sized liberal arts college off the grid, you're not in a major city, you're the one at risk. You're that one in the crosshairs in the middle because your costs are going up, your prices are going up, your ability to meet these sort of tighter, tight loop education experiences that we're talking about, as limited as you say. And so they're the ones that are financially at risk.
Sure. And so you don't believe that the Ivy Leagues will ever fall from grace, or?
It's I wouldn't say ever. there's no nevers.
Yeah.
What you do find is that at the end of the day, and this is how the field of higher education is a little different from some other fields, because at the end of the day, one of the things that was implied in what you were talking about is certification. So if you go to boot camp, all that an employer really wants to know is, do you have the skills? And often boot camps are focused on the types of learnings that can be tested. You can test if an engineer understands enough of Python to be able to do some programming. And so the certification process, Singularity University, with whom we do a lot of work, they're not certified, even though they call themselves a university. It's because in the United States, you have to lock your curriculum down for 2 years, and they change it every quarter, as I'm sure you do with the boot camps. And so we're going to come up with a completely new way of certifying trust that employers will accept, that is not the degree. Degrees, resumes, job descriptions, these are all going to go away eventually, because they all are mechanisms for trying to automate trust, and tremendously imperfect mechanisms. So we're going to come up with new ways that will probably look like what are typically called badges now. There'll be certification, but the certification will be totally different. That'll be backed by testing. It'll be backed by testimonials, and it'll probably be backed by the blockchain or something like that. Automates transparency, and all of those things will change the dynamic from a marketplace standpoint. But you're still going to have employers for some time that will say, no, a Harvard degree or a Stanford degree, we will hire you under any circumstances. So that's why they have a long-term sustainable brand. But it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed forever.
Yeah, definitely. And aside from trust, it seems as if more and more employers are starting to employ people based on attitude and experiences over just the skill set. What's your view on that?
Well, so in Silicon Valley, we typically call it hiring for a profile. So if you think of the combination of what that is the depth of knowledge you have of a particular field, and we often call these rooted or work content skills, but just, let's call them knowledges. That's what That's one category of skills. And then the other category are transferable skills. Those are skills that you use in a variety of different areas. So if you have the special knowledge or the knowledge of brain surgery, that's not tremendously useful in a lot of other categories. It's not transferable. So brain surgery is a body of knowledge. Transferable skills, it's everything from being good with people to analyzing information. They tend to be ing, gerund words. Those are transferable. Those are skills that are usable in a lot of different situations. If you were really good with people when you were 5 years old, you're probably going to be really good with people when you're 50 years old. And so what you find is that in the past, employers hired more, depending upon the field, with a higher index on knowledges. That is, do you have the body of information that's necessary to be able to perform this job? In the future, it's going to be more and more on what are often called soft skills, transferable skills, because it means that you will be adaptive to new situations. And as more and more information is online, more and more processes are automated, the depth of knowledge that is required, the rote learning that's required from many fields is reduced. Now, that doesn't mean I want my brain surgeon to get her degree online. I'd rather they actually were to school and had a lot of practice. But there's tons of jobs where employers will be in much more advantageous positions to hire on a profile. That is, you've got the set of characteristics. No, you don't know everything about this job, but I think you can really rapidly figure out what needs to be learned, gather that information, collaborate with others, and get the job done.
Yeah. Or the reverse of that is you have someone who is an absolute gun at a particular skill set. They may be an awesome developer, maybe Python or whatever language we want to throw out there, but maybe they just don't have those soft skills and they haven't got the right attitude and they're just a terrible employee. And that is the opposite. So you would rather hire someone with the right attitude that maybe needs a bit of work on the technical side, but they oftentimes are better than someone who thinks that they have all the right answers and just has a bad attitude, can't communicate with people, poor human relations, and so on.
And increasingly, that's a great point, because increasingly we find then, back to the whole thing about going through career change, the more you know about you, the more you know about what you love and what you believe you're good at, and what you can point to as previous experiences where you demonstrated those skills, those transferable skills, the better you're going to be prepared for exactly the kind of job you're talking about. You're going to be a better employee under those circumstances.
Yeah, definitely. So, Gary, just wanted to close out and touch on what color is your parachute? And the revised and updated edition combines some of the classic elements like the famed flower exercise with updated tips on social media and search tactics. What else can people expect to learn from the updated version?
So we'd point to a couple things. The first is that my father, since he's updated the book 46 times, he says, he's actually written 46 different books. They just all have the same title. Each year he's trying to reflect a lot of the characteristics of that year, or that era. During the Great Recession, it was a lot about survival job hunting and that sort of thing. So what you're going to find in 2017 is he simplified some of the things around the flower, some of the process around the flower. It really is a relentless focus on doing what works for you. And so the sequence of the book actually works through that. If you have been able to go through job hunts in the past successfully and career changes, you may just need to update a little bit of your thinking about yourself, your understanding about yourself. It's again, when it's not working. And so that's really what the sequence of the book, the way that it's designed right now, is to help you to continually add more and more to your toolkit. And then we've also done a number of things online to complement it. For people who just really want a very basic, quick sort of insights, that's often young people. At eParachute.com, we've got very simple set of tools that can give you some great insights and some great ideas about the kinds of work that you might want to go investigate more. And then you mentioned the flower, which is these 7 different petals or 7 characteristics of you, each with exercises about it. We've got a course on udemy.com, udemy.com, that my father recorded, and that's typically the thing people need the most help with. They want to be walked through those exercises, and so that's it's a great complement to the book for anybody who isn't able to just do those exercises on their own.
Fantastic. So that was eParachute.com, and we'll include all of those resources in the show notes for our listeners. Gary, we are down to the lightning round. This is where I ask all of my guests a couple of hypotheticals and one question on lifestyle design. Are you ready?
All right, fire away.
Okay, let's do it. So question number 1 is, if you could work for any company at any stage of the company life cycle, who would it be and why?
So I just have to express a bias. We've done a ton of work with Google over the years, and we just have a great affinity. We've done a range of projects with them, and they embody a lot of the things that we're talking about. They hire based on a profile. They've got really creative people. It's a big company now, and so it's different than when we started working with them a dozen years ago. But I'd say of all the companies we know, probably Google and Singularity University, which is much smaller, embody a lot of these characteristics.
Yeah, excellent. And question number 2 is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
That's a great one. So I admit that I'm a fan of U.S. history. So there's a couple of our, very specific, especially some of the founders. But I think if I've got probably one of my personal heroes is Gandhi, and a lot of the thinking nowadays in the U.S. is around conflict and that sort of thing. And I would love to be able to get his thoughts on the ways that we would be able to help people to focus on the positive and the positive impact they can have in the world. As unfortunately, a lot of the rhetoric nowadays, especially in the States with our current presidential campaign, is around the negatives in the world. Yeah. And so, we think you mentioned Peter Diamandis, he's got such a positive attitude towards abundance. Yeah. We would love people to be focusing on all the incredible things that we have nowadays.
Yeah, and I think he refers to CNN as the crisis news network. And I think he mentioned a story where he used to play a game where he'd turn up to, I think it was Singularity University, and maybe there was a TV in the lobby downstairs playing CNN, and he would see how many times he would turn up and it would be a negative news story, and it was something like 9 times out of 10. So we do have this tendency not just to report negative news, but to also notice it more than positives and to focus on what divides us instead of what unites us. So that's a great
Absolutely.
answer. And finally, Gary, I'm keen to find out how you stay on top of your game. Do you have any rituals or routines that you partake in on a daily basis?
Not necessarily on a daily basis. I'll tell you what I absolutely love is I'm probably more of a classic introvert.
Mm-hmm.
I think of myself as a socialized introvert. But what I find is, we've produced a lot of events and conferences through the years. I'm just completely revitalized by getting out and talking to people across all walks of life. You absolutely, we unfortunately have a monoculture. We have echo chambers in our thinking. We listen to only a narrow, set of people on Facebook. We look at only a narrow set of news. And we tend to have very polarizing sources of information. And the more I get out and I talk to a range of people, the more energized I am.
Yeah. And I think that ties in perfectly with what we were talking about earlier when it comes to discovery. If you are looking to do something different, get out there, meet as many different people as possible, get out of your comfort zone, because unless you have that information and awareness, you won't know what opportunities or what fields of work may appeal to you.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So you mentioned eParachute.com. Where else can our listeners go to find out a little bit more about yourself?
I'd love to go to medium.com. I've published a series of articles on unbundling and what I call the middle, sort of the changes in a variety of different fields. There's one on, in the U.S., the growing gap between the haves and have-nots. And I think I'd love people to look at that and see if that helps them to be able to understand some of these polarizing changes that we're talking about and some of the ways that we can actually overcome them.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure to look those up and add them to the show notes. So thanks again for your time today, Gary. You've been an awesome guest, and I'm sure our audience will get a lot out of your insights.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Best luck to all.
Well, that's it for episode number 72. I hope you enjoyed that. Gary did indeed provide a wealth of information and insights for you lucky listeners. As always, if you're picking up what we're putting down, please take a second to like, share, and or subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. You can find out more about Collective Campus and read more on personal disruption, on corporate innovation, on entrepreneurship at www.collectivecamp.us. Until next time, keep asking questions. Future Squared out.